All right, so today we're going deep on Paul Ricoeur, a pretty important 20th century French philosopher, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. A major figure. His work has really had an impact. I mean, it's been translated, discussed all over the world.
Yeah, the guy was prolific. We're talking tons of books, essays, the whole deal.
Hmm.
Actually, they even named a square after him in Paris.
That's right, on his 100th birthday. A real honor.
Shows you the kind of influence he had.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, I thought we could really dig into some of the key concepts in his work,
Yeah, sounds good.
especially his philosophical anthropology.
Yeah,
I think that's where a lot of his most interesting ideas come together.
absolutely. And it's something that I think can really resonate with people today, even if they're not familiar with all the philosophical jargon.
Right, exactly. Because when you get down to it, he's really talking about what it means to be human, what it means to be a capable human being, as he put it.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it. This idea of the capable human being is really at the heart of his work. He's trying to understand, what are those core capacities that allow us to act responsibly,
Make choices.
form meaningful relationships, basically navigate this complex world.
With all its ups and downs.
Exactly. And, I think what makes his work so compelling is that he doesn't shy away from the messiness of it all.
Yeah, he's not afraid to grapple with those big existential questions.
No, not at all. He was fascinated by this tension between our potential for good and, our inherent fallibility, the fact that we often fall short.
Well, he knew a thing or two about challenges, right?
Mm.
I mean, his own life had a pretty dramatic start, losing both his parents in World War I when he was just a kid.
Oh, it was a rough start. Raised by his grandparents and an aunt in a devout Protestant household, and then later on,
World War II comes along.
yeah, captured, ends up in a prisoner of war camp. I mean, you can imagine.
Yeah, what a time to be alive.
Yeah.
But it's incredible, even in that situation, he kept his intellectual curiosity going.
It's true, yeah.
I read somewhere that he was studying Karl Jaspers, even translating Husserl, while he was a prisoner.
It's remarkable. Talk about making the most of a bad situation.
Seriously.
Yeah.
But I guess those experiences really shaped him, wouldn't you say?
Oh, without a doubt. Those thinkers, especially Jaspers and Husserl, really influenced his developing philosophy. You can see their ideas kind of resonating throughout his work.
And it seems like that whole experience of war, of seeing humanity at its best and worst, that probably had a big impact on how he viewed human nature, right?
Absolutely. Especially this idea that there's a fundamental difference between human beings and mere objects. This was something that really fascinated him. What sets us apart, Our capacity for thought,
For choice.
for making ethical decisions. It's not something that a rock or a tree can do.
Right, exactly. So those seeds of his philosophical anthropology, this idea that humans, unlike things,
Mhm.
have this inherent ability to act with intention,
With purpose.
responsibility. It all kind of starts to come together there, doesn't it?
It really does. And this distinction, this idea that we're not just reacting to the world, but actively shaping it through our choices, it becomes a cornerstone of his work.
But it's interesting because he wasn't advocating for, like, this strict mind-body dualism, right?
Right.
We're just these disembodied minds floating around.
No, not at all. He recognized the interconnectedness of our being. He saw this wholeness where our physical existence plays a vital role in who we are, how we engage with the world.
Right, we're not just minds, we're embodied beings.
Embodied, exactly.
So it's not about denying the limitations of our physical nature, but more about, I don't know, maybe recognizing how we operate within those limitations.
Yeah.
To exercise our freedom,
Yeah.
to make choices. It's not about pretending we're not subject to natural laws, but rather understanding how we can act within those constraints.
That's a great way to put it. It's not about transcending our physicality, but rather working with it, finding freedom within those limitations.
Yeah, like a dancer working with the constraints of gravity, right? They're not denying gravity exists, but they're using it to create something beautiful.
I love that analogy. And this leads us to his early work in phenomenology, which was heavily influenced by those early experiences.
And by those thinkers he encountered, right?
Yeah.
Like Husserl and Jasper.
Exactly. His first major work, Freedom and Nature, it really dives deep into this interplay between what he calls the voluntary and involuntary aspects of human existence.
So it's this push and pull between what we consciously choose
Mm-hmm.
and those aspects of ourselves that are, I don't know, beyond our immediate control.
Yeah, those forces that are shaping us, sometimes without us even realizing it.
It's like we're not just slaves to our instincts, but
Mhm.
we're not completely free from them either.
Right. And he was pushing back against this idea of absolute freedom that was, popular among some existentialist thinkers at the time.
Right, like Sartre.
Yeah, exactly. He was arguing for a more nuanced understanding of freedom, highlighting how those voluntary and involuntary experiences, they're not separate, they're actually deeply interconnected.
And our bodies are right at the center of that, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Our bodies, they're subject to natural processes.
Yeah.
We age, we get sick, we experience things beyond our control.
But we're also the very instruments through which we express our will. Right.
Exactly. We act in the world through our bodies. We experience joy and sorrow through our bodies. It's all connected.
So it's this constant interplay back and forth between what we choose and what's given to us.
And it's through that dynamic, that back and forth, that he believed we forge our individual identities and contribute to this larger story of humanity.
Right. And it makes you think about the question of responsibility in a different light, doesn't it? If we're
Yeah.
not just free-floating minds, but embodied beings shaped by forces both within and outside of our control.
Oh, it definitely complicates things, but it also, I think, makes the whole idea of responsibility more meaningful, more grounded.
Yeah, it's not just about abstract ideas anymore,
Right. It's about recognizing the complexities of our being.
but it also seems to bring up another big question, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if we're capable of so much good, of making choices, of shaping the world around us, doesn't that also imply...
The capacity for evil.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's where his thinking takes a really fascinating turn. His initial work in phenomenology kind of bracketed the question of evil, but it was something he couldn't ignore for long.
And that's where his later work on hermeneutics comes in, right?
Exactly. Infallible Man and the symbolism of evil, he really starts to grapple with this problem head on.
And it seems like he realized that to really understand evil, to understand the human condition in its entirety, you need more than just description, right?
Right.
You need to understand how humans make meaning,
Yeah.
how we use symbols, how we tell stories to grapple with these really difficult concepts.
Absolutely. And that's where that famous phrase of his comes in, the symbol gives rise to thought.
Yeah, I love that quote.
It really captures this shift in his thinking.
It's like he's saying that language itself, especially in its more poetic forms, carries this depth of meaning that often defies simple logical explanation.
Right. It's not just about conveying information.
It's about something deeper.
Yeah, it's about evoking a feeling, creating a connection.
And I think that's something we often lose sight of in our, hyper-rational, data-driven world.
It's easy to get caught up in the surface level of things.
Yeah, to forget the power of myth, of metaphor, of story.
Exactly. And Ricoeur was really reminding us of that power. He was saying, hey, there's more to language than just denotation. There's this whole realm of connotation, of symbolic meaning that we need to pay attention to if we want to truly understand ourselves and the world.
And that led him to confront the rise of structuralism, right?
Oh, yeah.
This school of thought that was all about finding the underlying structures of language, of culture,
And reducing meaning to those structures.
like trying to fit the whole human experience into this neat little box.
Exactly. And Ricoeur, he saw the value of structural analysis as a tool, but he also saw its limitation.
Yeah. He wasn't about to let those structures define the whole story.
No way. He believed that there's always this surplus of meaning, this overflow that exceeds any attempt to contain it within a purely structural framework.
And that's where his exploration of those forms of cohesive discourse comes in, right?
Yeah, things like metaphor, narrative, religious, and political discourse. He wanted to show how those forms of language could illuminate those aspects of human experience that structuralism couldn't quite grasp.
And that's where we'll pick up next time.
Yeah, we've got a lot more ground to cover.
But this is a good starting point, I think.
Hey.
A good foundation for understanding where Ricoeur is coming from and why his work is still so relevant today.
I agree. He's a thinker who really rewards careful reading and reflection.
And we're just getting started. So join us next time as we continue our deep dive into the fascinating world of Paul Ricoeur.
Welcome back. So last time we were talking about how Ricoeur saw this fullness of language, this idea that meaning always kind of overflows, any attempt to just confine it to these strict structures.
Right, yeah, exactly. And this is where his exploration of various forms of what he called extended discourse becomes really important.
Okay.
So he starts turning his attention to things like metaphor, narrative, even religious and political discourse. And he's showing how these forms of language really shape how we understand ourselves,
Yeah, the world around us, our place in it.
Absolutely.
So let's start with metaphor. I mean, it seems like such a basic, almost like elemental part of language. What was it about metaphor that Ricoeur found so fascinating?
Well, he was really interested in how metaphors can actively redescribe reality. It's not just about, pretty language. They can actually create these connections between concepts that seem completely different on the surface. Okay, so you're saying that metaphors can change how we see things, not just like describe them in a more interesting way.
Oh, absolutely. Think about a really powerful metaphor, one that kind of, it jolts you with its originality. It can make you rethink assumptions, see things in a whole new light.
Like it disrupts your usual way of seeing.
Exactly. And he believed that this metaphorical twist, this tension between the literal and the figurative, is key for expanding our understanding of the world. It's not just about poetry, it's essential for any form of discourse that's trying to communicate something deep and complex about human experience.
Okay, so how does this all connect back to his work on narrative? I know we touched on it before, but I'm curious to hear more about how narrative fits into his overall philosophy.
Well, Ricoeur saw narrative as this incredibly powerful way of making sense of human action and time, these two concepts that are really intertwined. He argued that stories, whether they're fictional or historical, they provide a framework for understanding how events unfold, how actions have consequences, and basically how we create meaning out of the flow of time.
I'm starting to see the connection. It's like those moments when you look back in your life and you suddenly see the connection between past choices and your present circumstances.
Yeah.
Almost like a narrative arc is revealed, right?
Exactly. And Ricoeur went even further, suggesting that this narrative structure, it's not just some literary device, it's fundamental to how we experience and understand ourselves. We literally tell stories about our lives, shaping our identity through those narratives. And we also interpret the world through the lens of the stories that we inherit from our culture.
So we're both the authors and the readers of our own lives.
Right. We're constantly creating and interpreting, rewriting and rereading our own stories and the stories of others.
Which kind of makes you think about the potential for, manipulation. If so much of who we are is shaped by these narratives, couldn't those narratives be distorted or used to control people?
Oh, absolutely. And Ricoeur was very aware of that danger. He acknowledged that stories can be used for ill, but he also believed in their capacity for good.
So it's a double-edged sword, this power of narrative.
Right. It can be used to deceive, to perpetuate harmful ideologies, but it can also be used to promote understanding, to inspire empathy.
Think about the role of storytelling in social justice movements, right? Sharing those personal narratives can really make a difference.
Absolutely. And Ricoeur believed that by critically examining narratives, by paying attention to whose voices are being heard and whose are being silenced, we can start to challenge those dominant narratives, those stories that often serve those in power.
So it's about becoming more critical readers of those narratives, right?
Mhm.
Not just passively absorbing them, but really thinking about their implications.
Exactly. We need to be asking those tough questions. Who's telling the story? What are their motivations? What perspectives are being left out?
That's where his hermeneutics of suspicion comes in, I guess.
Right, yeah.
It's about reading between the lines, being aware of those hidden agendas.
Absolutely.
And this leads us to his work on religious and political discourse,
Right.
two areas where the power of narrative is particularly potent, right?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. He saw both religion and politics as relying heavily on symbolic language and storytelling to create meaning, to inspire action, to mobilize people.
And this is where that critical awareness becomes even more important when you say, we need to be wary of how these stories are being used, especially when they're tied to systems of power.
Oh, absolutely. Ricoeur recognized that religious discourse, with its focus on the transcendent, the ineffable, it often uses symbols and myths to express truths that kind of defy rational explanation.
Yeah, it's dealing with things that are beyond our ability to fully grasp.
Exactly. And he acknowledged the profound role that religion can play in human life, but he also saw how these stories could be used to justify dogma, intolerance.
So we need to approach these religious narratives with this sense of both respect and critical awareness, like appreciating the beauty of a stained glass window while also understanding that it's filtering the light in a particular way.
Right.
That's a great analogy. And the same critical approach applies to political discourse, where language is often used to persuade, to inspire, and, unfortunately, sometimes to manipulate.
Right, to control the narrative.
Exactly. He saw politics as inherently rhetorical, this realm where the stakes are high and the power of storytelling is really immense.
So it's about recognizing that persuasive power of political narratives, being aware of the stories being told, the values that they promote, and the potential consequences of embracing or rejecting those stories.
Exactly. And all of this ultimately leads us to, I think, the culmination of Ricoeur's philosophical journey,
Hmm.
his exploration of narrative identity and the nature of the self.
Okay, so part 3, we're going deep on the self.
Diving into the heart of who we are, how we make sense of our lives through these narratives that we create and inherit.
All right, so we're back and ready to tackle what's often seen as, the heart of Ricoeur's philosophy.
Yeah, the big questions about the self.
Narrative identity. It's a fascinating concept, but I have to admit, it's also a bit mind-bending. Like, is he really saying that who we are is just a story we tell ourselves?
Well, it's not quite that simple. It's not about just making things up, but more about, I guess, making meaning out of our experiences. Think about it. We don't just exist in the world, we experience it, right?
Yeah, we go through
We
things.
make choices, we form relationships, all those things, and those experiences become part of our personal story.
Like the raw material of our lives.
Exactly. And Ricoeur argued that we actively weave those experiences into a narrative that helps us understand who we are.
So it's not just about passively letting life happen to us, it's about making sense of it.
Yeah, creating a coherent story out of all those seemingly random events.
It's like looking back on your life and realizing that certain events, even those that seemed insignificant at the time, were actually turning points that led you to where you are today.
Right, and those turning points, they become part of your story.
And the way we tell that story, the meaning we give to those events, that shapes who we become.
Exactly. And he emphasized that this whole process of narrative self-construction isn't something we do in isolation. We're always interacting with others.
Our stories bump up against each other.
Yeah, and they get intertwined.
Mm.
Our identity is shaped not only by the narratives we tell ourselves, but also by the narratives that others tell about us.
So it's this ongoing dialogue, a back and forth.
Yeah, a constant exchange of stories.
It's like we're all these interconnected threads woven together into this larger tapestry of meaning.
I love that image. It really captures this sense of interconnectedness that was so central to Ricker's view of what it means to be human.
We're not these isolated individuals, we're part of something larger.
Right, and our capacity for selfhood is tied to our ability to recognize and be recognized by others.
It makes you think about the importance of community, of belonging, of those shared stories that connect us.
Absolutely, but it also raises some interesting questions, doesn't it? Like, if our identity is so fluid, so influenced by all these interwoven narratives, does that mean there's no such thing as a stable self?
Yeah, is there even a core me that endures throughout all this change?
That's a question that really troubled a lot of thinkers, and Ricoeur had a really interesting way of addressing it. He introduced this distinction between item identity and ipsi identity.
Okay, break that down for me.
So, item identity refers to the unchanging, static sense of self, the I that remains constant over time.
Like the basic facts of my existence, my name, my birth date, those things.
Yeah, the things that don't change regardless of what happens in your life.
Very unchanging core.
Right. But Ricoeur argued that item identity is only part of the story. Equally important is what he called ips identity, which refers to the self that endures through change.
So that's the who that evolves over time.
Exactly. It's the self that learns from experiences, forms relationships, makes choices.
It's like a river, right? It
Mhm.
retains its essential nature while also constantly changing as it flows toward the sea.
I love that. It really captures this idea of continuity through change.
So we're not denying that there's a continuity to our existence, but we're also recognizing that this continuity doesn't mean we can't change, we can't grow.
And that this dynamic interplay between item and ips identity, it's essential for understanding the complexities of selfhood.
So we're both the same and different over time.
Yeah, and embracing that paradox, I think that's part of what makes us fully human.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, but it's also incredibly liberating, isn't it? To think that we're not just fixed, predetermined beings, but that we have this capacity for growth, for change.
I think so too.
But what about the ethical implications of this view? I mean, if who we are is so intertwined with our narratives, with the stories we tell ourselves and others tell about us, how do we make responsible choices? How do we hold ourselves accountable?
That's a great question, and this is where Ricoeur's idea of a little ethics comes in. He argued that this capacity for narrative self-construction, it's not just about understanding our past, it's also about projecting ourselves into the future.
So thinking about the kind of person we want to become,
Exactly. And he believed that this ethical dimension of narrative identity, it's grounded in our relationships with others.
So it's not just about me and my story. It's about recognizing that my story is always intertwined with the stories of others.
Right, we're not isolated individuals. Our choices has ripple effects.
And we have a responsibility to consider those effects.
Yeah, to think about how our actions might impact others.
It makes you realize that ethics isn't just about following rules. It's about understanding the interconnectedness of our lives.
And that brings us to Ricoeur's final major work, Memory, History, Forgetting, where he really grapples with those big issues of collective memory.
Historical responsibility.
Yeah, the possibility of forgiveness.
It's like he's bringing all those threads of his philosophy together in this work, isn't he?
He is. He's looking at how narrative shapes not just our individual lives, but also our understanding of the past, our shared future.
So he's moving from the personal to the collective.
Yeah, and he recognized that societies, just like individuals, construct their identity through narrative.
We have our collective stories, our national myths.
Exactly. And those stories shape how we see ourselves, our values, our place in the world.
But he was also aware of the dangers of those collective narratives, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He knew that memory can be distorted, manipulated.
Used to justify all sorts of things.
Right, and he was deeply concerned with how memory can be used to perpetuate injustice, to silence voices, to deny responsibility for past wrongs.
It's like when a nation's history is rewritten to glorify certain events and erase others.
Yeah, it happens all the time, and it often serves the interests of those in power.
So how do we deal with that? How do we ensure that our collective memory is more honest, more inclusive?
Well, Ricoeur argued that a truly ethical approach to history requires a willingness to confront those difficult truths of the past, to acknowledge the suffering of victims.
And to find ways to repair the damage that's been done.
It's not about dwelling in guilt or shame, but about using the past to inform our present actions, to create a more just and compassionate future.
And that leads us to forgiveness, right? One of those concepts that's so easy to talk about in the abstract, but so much harder to put into practice.
Oh, for sure. And Ricoeur acknowledged those complexities. He knew that forgiveness isn't easy, especially when we're talking about acts that have caused immense suffering.
But he also saw it as essential for healing, both on a personal and a collective level.
Yeah, he saw it as a way of breaking free from those cycles of violence and resentment.
So how did he believe true forgiveness was possible?
He argued that it requires a deep understanding of the perpetrator's motives, a recognition of their shared humanity, and a willingness to release the grip of anger and resentment.
It's about acknowledging the past, but not letting it define the future.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that both victims and perpetrators are capable of change.
It's a powerful idea.
And a challenging one.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from his early influences to his later work on memory and forgiveness, and I feel like I have a whole new understanding of Ricoeur's thought.
It's been a pleasure exploring his work with you. He was a truly remarkable thinker.
And for our listeners, I think Ricoeur leaves us with some important questions to ponder. How do our personal narratives shape who we are? How can we use our understanding of narrative to create more just and compassionate stories, both for ourselves and for the world?
Yeah, and how can we embrace that difficult work of forgiveness, both in our personal lives and in our collective efforts to heal the wounds of the past?
These are questions that are worth wrestling with.
And I think Ricoeur's work provides us with some valuable tools for navigating those complex ethical and existential terrains.
A huge thank you to our expert for guiding us through this incredible deep dive.
Yeah.
And to all of you listening, keep those questions coming. Keep exploring those big ideas, because that's what makes life and philosophy so endlessly fascinating. Thanks for joining us.